As absolutely every other student right now, us fashion graduates are working towards a digital submission and consequently mostly focusing on digital work and sitting behind a computer. So today I'm going to be showing you what I've done these past few weeks, which is mostly going to be digital work. Last week we had our first technical tutorial with our head of technicians and she gave us a presentation on technical specification sheets. We are expected to create 1 million of them since we have to be very thorough at explaining every little detail, so about 4 pages for each garment. Not each look, each garment, so there's going to be 1 million of them. Now thankfully we don't need to draw everything out so specifically in detail like on these examples because we're not physically creating a garment, so we can only imagine what the finishing would be like, but everything like the shape, fronts, backs, prints, surface manipulations and details we are using Adobe Illustrator for. Now because I only have a total of 1 item physically complete, I thought I would start with those trousers. I tried them on, I realized that the front closure, the fastening detail was not exactly thought through and that would be something I would have to focus on in this illustration. I thought trying those trousers on would kind of break the ice in terms of how I could illustrate them because these are the only things I actually have physical and all the other elements I would have to sort of imagine the closure, imagine the fastening, so I was glad to try and start with those. For the technical sheet where I showed the inner finish of the trousers, I thought I would just lay them flat and take a photo because the inner waistband is so specifically constructed and that helps distribute the weight of the trousers evenly in the waist, but I just thought I would take a photo of it flat and then illustrate on top of that photo because it would help me to sort of visualize the way the flat drawing could look a bit better. We were sent an example of how we could approach the task and it was sort of like an A4 almost blank sheet of paper where we could just paste our illustrations into. I found it to be a little bit irrelevant as for the type of information I wanted to add there, so I made my own technical sheets. I filled them with my technical drawings for look number 1 and finished the trousers with the top so that I could ask our technician whether it was a correct way of presenting a technical sheet because we have never done that before. We have done illustrations, technical illustrations, but those were like a full illustration of a full look rather than an illustration of each garment separately with showing every finish, every little detail. So I hope that I made it correctly and I won't have to remake it ever again. Also, sometime those past few weeks we had another tutorial with a graphic design tutor, Alina. She was very helpful in terms of giving different resources for me to research and she gave me a new direction to take in terms of how I could customize my portfolio. She gave me an idea towards working with typography a little bit, and that is something I've not done in my previous portfolios because I usually treat it as a visual representation rather than actual explanations and notes in the work, but here I think it works pretty well because I took inspiration from the registration blanks which I have to fill out every time I enter Russia, and honestly I never end up filling them myself. Lowell fills them because I get too frustrated, but even those frustration marks I'm showing in here as well. So I use the information that I want to show in the portfolio but present it in a way that it would have been written in a blank. So there is a little bit of typography, there is hand spacing in those little rectangles, and then there is a little bit of like cursive writing as if it's someone's signature. So I think it works pretty well in this portfolio and I do like how Alina suggested I introduce something similar. So there's a little bit like pencil corrections and some markings, so I do think that's a pretty interesting way of presenting my portfolio, and you'll see a little bit later on in the end of this video I'll show what I've done so far with all the pages and you'll see how they correlate with each other even though they're a little bit different. I found that having all of the inspiration images for my portfolio in one place is very helpful, so I used an app called Milanote that my friend Julia suggested, thank you Julia, and I made a mood board with all the inspiration images, typography, potential fonts and potential ways of treating the paper for the portfolio, so I highly suggest you check it out. It's essentially an organizational app, so it has multiple different functions and ways of working with it. It's very intuitive, very simple, so especially during those difficult quarantine times I think it will be helpful for you if you can't organize yourself and if you feel the lack of motivation. Maybe it will help you structure your thoughts. Also, a lot of information on this particular mood board is from a website called Another Graphic. Alina, the graphic design tutor, suggested I check it out and it has a bunch of different cool up-to-date modern graphic design references which gave me a couple of ideas and directions to take in my portfolio, so maybe it will be helpful for you as a fashion design graduate, graphic design graduate, I don't know. I thought I would show you that it's not just for mood boards. I have a submission requirements list and a couple of PDFs linked below if I wanted to see the original document from where I got the information from, and I shared the link with my groupmates so that we all could check out the submission requirements every time we needed to. As you may have seen in my previous video and in one of the videos I started the year with, I was trying epoxy and I was trying to trap fabric samples in between epoxy layers, and right from the start I knew that this was not going to be the technique I wanted to use because it's absolutely not sustainable, trapping biodegradable materials in between something not that biodegradable. So I'm finally here to try bioplastics, and I have here glycerin, cornstarch, white vinegar, water and everything that I'm going to be measuring it out in. So I'm going to test it out and see how that goes. Hopefully I'm going to be able to use this as one of my accessory ideas, and maybe in some little details like buttons and like fastening methods and maybe ways of customizing the zips for myself. We'll see how that goes, but I'm very excited. I'm using a recipe book which I found on Pinterest. It's called Recipes for Material Activism, and if that works out well, I'm obviously going to leave it down below, but you're going to be able to also try it out as well. And also on that recipe I read that there's a lot of good hints and explanations as to how you could use the material, how you could play around with, and thankfully a while ago when I was very actively baking and making like fondant cakes and very difficult constructions, I bought this clay extruder which I saw a lot of bakers use for decorations for fondant extruding. So I don't think I've ever used it actually for fondant because I went on to making buttercream cakes all the way, but then I am very glad that I still have it because it has multiple different nozzles which you could extrude this material out of, and if that works out I could also try it out with some food coloring. I have liquid food coloring and then dried versions which are quite old and I'm not sure if they're going to work, but they might work out to be quite interesting as paint splatters or like correction things. So I was thinking with this clay extruder to extrude this in a string and make it layer on top of each other, and for it to look as if it's been like a three-dimensionalized version of aggressive, sort of like a correction and a blank. If that works out, it's going to be pretty cool. If it doesn't, I'm still going to manage to think of different alternative ways of using it, I hope. So this particular recipe I'm trying calls for 1 full tablespoon of cornstarch, and I have a half tablespoon measure, so this is going to be a little bit less of a clean process. 1 teaspoon of glycerin, 1 teaspoon of white vinegar, and 4 tablespoons of water. Now I'm just going to have to cook it on the stove until a paste forms, and I'm going to use a spatula to vigorously kind of smooth everything together, and then I'm going to try to lay it in a flat layer. I think this silicone baking mold from the last epoxy experiments well enough, and I'm not using it for baking because it is sliced to pieces. So I'm probably going to try to lay a flat sheet of this potential bioplastic. I haven't cooked it yet. There's not too much of it, so I'm going to probably try in different batches. This first one I'm not going to try with different food dyes and colors just to see how it performs on its own, and it's probably going to take up about 1/3 of this mold. So all the other ones I'm also going to try in here. The one with food coloring on the water base, the one with dried food coloring in here, and then I'm going to try to extrude something somewhere in here just because I don't think it's going to take up all that long to dry.
And they're fine, very fine. No I'm not what you were snooping for, honestly, Richard.
Let's just go now.
Logan? Plan. You changed the plan. Plan's gone, baby.
I don't appreciate you.
Apparently the proper tone went out with the plan.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Rory's not headed back to school.
Not yet, anyhow.
So this is what I have for now. I let them to dry for about an hour, I think. This was my second batch, and as you can see it's a bit more cloudy than the previous versions, and I think I messed it up. Well, I'm pretty sure I messed it up because I added a bit too much cornstarch and the ratio was off, so there was not enough glycerin to the mixture. So I don't know how that's going to dry, but I'm still going to leave it because for now it's just flaking off in pieces, and obviously it's still a bit too wet for it to be peeling off in a flat layer, which I don't really anticipate is going to happen anyways. Those 3 were from the first batch and they're a little bit different. So this one, as you can see, is a little bit shiny, a little slimy, not wet, and I don't think it's tearing apart in pieces. However, I'm not going to be trying to peel it off right now because in here I tried a little bit and I think it is also prone to tearing because it's a little gentle. Those strings are, well, not exactly what I was hoping for them to be because they are not straight, so I think those I'm going to try to extrude from a piping bag next time because it has a larger capacity, although I don't have very thin nozzles for them, so I'm thinking they might be a bit too thick, or I should find a different nozzle, which is quite a challenge right now in quarantine, but it's not the biggest problem in the world, so I might just omit this idea. And here is the one where I added a little bit of powder food coloring on top. It looked a little bit more interesting before it kind of blended all together, because in here you can see a little speck of that food coloring that accidentally got transferred from that one, and this is all just sort of like a puddle, which is also quite interesting. I think it does resemble a little bit like those different shading areas from the body scans if you look from different angles, so like a dark orange and a light orange and different gradients from it, which is quite nice. I'm not the biggest fan, however, how the fabric is trapped in between the layers, and obviously it's not the final stage of it, because I remember I went to a 3D workshop one day and a girl named Dasha, who we went to foundation with, showed me her current degree project, and she was working exploring bioplastics as well, which I'm not sure where she took it because it was quite a while ago, but I remember her bioplastics being in a very plastic-like stage, so I'm sure she had this sort of liquid silicone-like stage as well, but the ones she showed me were quite dry, and I think that those might turn in those as well into dry plasticky versions, but I'm just waiting for it for now. I don't know how that's gonna turn out, but let's hope. And here are the 11 pages of my portfolio I managed to do so far. They might still undergo a couple of changes, but so far I don't really mind how they look. So first page is my color palette with some contextual imagery. In the spirit of my collection, I thought it would be interesting for me to make my own code for each color. For L stands for look, and look 1 has this percentage of color in it, look something has this percentage of color in it. So this is first of the 2 fabrication boards that I made. Again, contextual imagery on the left and all the information and the actual fabrics on the right. This is my second fabrication board, and again you'll see that the writing is consistent. It's sort of similar to the thing that you saw in the beginning of the video, and I love the crossouts and I love the sort of aggressive writing on the right as well. This is what I was working on in the beginning of the video, and this is one of the many mood boards to come. Page inspiration for look number 1. Page for look number 3 with the technical illustration of the trousers from that look, with a couple of notes and photos and close-ups of what would be printed essentially on them. This is sort of like a reference page for the technique that I wanted to use, which would be layering in the shoulder pads that you can see on the left. They are actually made out of multiple layers of recycled fabric, and I think they look quite interesting and represent a similar idea of an old worn down passport pages. And an updated version of those shoulder pads was made by my helper from level 4, and you can see her in a couple of vlogs back, which I'll link down below. This is one of the older pages, which I'm not the biggest fan of because it doesn't really have much reference to the language of that documentation, which I'm probably going to add in later on. But it is like a reference page for look number 3 leather top. This is sort of like a reference for look number 5's color palette, rather than any physical details or references for it. And this is more of an actual mood board for look number 5. So there is again a technical drawing, an undressing little experiment that I had, and then a security check, which I took the inspiration from for those scanner prints on the right. And the last for today is a technique mood board. So a lot of things I used in terms of surface and print design are here. So crumbling, pleating with different print types, lino print, digital print, distressing, and many other different techniques. I will definitely talk you through my entire degree collection portfolio once I graduate, and maybe talk you through all my other portfolios and show you this way the evolution of my work process and maybe some techniques I learned about working in a portfolio throughout this 4 years. But for now, this is it. I would like to thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye!